Okay, well, let's get underway. Hello and welcome to the King Street Townhouse in Manchester and the latest of our Broadcast Revolution events. It's genuinely terrific to actually be in front of people. We were saying this, weren't we? It's kind of like, there's people there.
I've put a dress on and everything.
I know, we're all smart. Yeah. Edward and I were more used to doing overnights at 5 Live, and we were pretty scruffy, weren't we, really? On the whole, well, I was anyway. To be here in Manchester, just down the road from Media City, feels very, very special. Those of you who are here, thank you for being here. You get all the free cake, you get all the free drinks. But there are plenty of people watching the live stream of this as well, hundreds in fact. So hello to you watching at home, at the office or wherever you are. My name's Mike Young, and I joined Broadcast Revolution just under a year ago after more than 20 years as a producer, a presenter, a reporter, a jack of all trades at the BBC, largely at 5 Live, at Radio 4, but before that in BBC Local Radio. Just down the road from us then is Salford's Media City, and it is 10 years now since Anna and I moved up from London, and the BBC relocated 5 Live, BBC Sports, BBC Breakfast, BBC Children's to here. And it's getting bigger and bigger. The BBC's business unit is relocating virtually as we speak, and gradually arriving in Salford. The office space getting rather crowded.
They've stolen my desks. Got an email to say yesterday they're stealing our desks. We've got to move. There's loads of them.
And Newsbeat for Radio 1 is moving to Birmingham. So gradually, the very expensive and magnificent broadcasting house with its big modern extension in London is getting a little bit more space. That was extremely crowded, and a lot more people are coming to Salford. And of course, at Media City, you now have not just the BBC, you have the Coronation Street set, which always looked quite cool as it was being built. You also have Granada there too. I should add there's 6 Music, there's Radio 4, there's Radio 3. There are lots of other teams, BBC Religion, all there at Media City. A couple of points of order for you. For those watching the live stream, if you'd like to ask a question of our guest today, you can do so via our Twitter account, and it's @BroadcastRevo is how to ask us a question. You can also go to join the chat using the hashtag #JoinTheBroadcastRevolution, but send your questions through to @BroadcastRevo. If you're in the room and you have a question, I'll invite questions somewhere along the line. Stick your hand up. I will try and get to you as fast as we can. Maybe shout out who you are and where you're from, and we'll make sure that we get your question put across to Anna. By the way, anyone who does ask a question automatically gets entered into a quarterly draw for a free Broadcast for Good campaign. This is where we will deliver a free campaign to a charity of your choice on your behalf, and we'll do a draw for that in the coming weeks. Let's get down to business then. Our guest today is Anna Stewart. She is the editor of one of BBC Radio 5 Live's flagship programmes, 5 Live Drive. To me, Drive is the very best of what that great network broadcasts. I worked on it for a very happy couple of years. It blended news and sport and business seamlessly. I think the trick was it had some of the most engaging presenters and the genuinely lovely people to work with presenters as well, which was a particular treat. And also the hours in radio terms weren't bad. You would be at least there in daylight hours, which is quite nice.
If you get on Drive, you want to stay on Drive.
Yes.
No weekends either, which is unheard of.
No one wanted to leave the Drive programme. I ended up going off to do 4 years on 5 Live Breakfast, and that was slightly more matchsticks in the eyes by the end of all of that. Anna is truly a rising star at the Beeb. You started 2004 as a broadcast assistant on Breakfast on 5 Live. Then you did a runner to an independent for a while, didn't you?
Yeah, I didn't fancy moving up to Manchester at the time, so I went to work for an independent, but I did make shows for 5 Live, so I've never strayed that far away. And then actually this move seemed a bit more interesting a couple of years later, and I ended up signing up to come to Manchester, and it was the best thing I ever did. No regrets.
The independent you worked for, you were working on 5 Live programmes, but made by an independent.
Yeah.
So that was Eamon Holmes?
Eamon Holmes and Gabby Logan.
Gabby Logan, big stars.
Yeah.
And then a bit of BBC Sport as well for you?
Bit of BBC Sport. I thought I wanted to be a sport producer for quite a long time, and I did freelance for probably 2 years, I think. So I got, 2 trips to Wimbledon, working at Wimbledon fortnights, always real high. done programmes from Lords and a couple of, football grounds, but I ended up back in news actually, and that wasn't a big career decision. It's just when I went for a permanent job in sport, I didn't get it. and then I just was working back in news and jobs came up, I got the job in news. I think sometimes you end up, not in control of your own career. Sometimes, those moments you think you've had a huge failure, which it felt for me at the time when I didn't get that sport job. Now I ended up back in news, perhaps it was meant to be, because I've ended up editor of also my favourite programme, which is my absolute dream job. So sometimes these things you think are awful at the time and big failures can take you in the direction you were meant to go.
Absolutely. You went back after maternity leave as a senior journalist on Drive, then you became an assistant editor on Drive, and then you took over as editor April 2020.
Yes, that's when I got the permanent job. So I don't know if any of you worked at the BBC or it's similar in your industry or know people. The BBC will often put you on what's called an attachment. So I had to do a written application to become Drive editor for 12 weeks. And it was 12 weeks only, very strictly. We can only give it you for 12 weeks when I was offered it. And it was interesting actually, because I was, like Mike says, I came back 2 or 3 days a week as a senior journalist. And there were 2 men who were my assistant editors, they were my bosses. And I moved up to assistant quite quickly, and then I got the editor job over both of those. So the people who were my managers at the time, I then became their managers. So there's like an interesting dynamic there. They both went off to work on different programmes and asked to come back to work with me on Drive. So I take that as a, no, they were desperate to come back. So I take that as a compliment, and we all get on great. But these kind of dynamics quite interesting in the industry, aren't they? So yeah, it was initially for 12 weeks, and then it was extended and extended. And actually, by the time they advertised it, I had to interview for the job permanently. It was the start of the pandemic, when just kind of the last thing you need, you don't really know what's going on. I had to do the interview, and I'd been enrolled for about 7 months. So obviously they had something to judge me on, which can be an advantage or disadvantage, I think. But yeah, I was thrilled when I was offered the job permanently. April last year, is that? Yeah,
2020, yeah.
Lose track of time through the pandemic, don't you?
The reason I kind of mentioned April 2020 was there you are confirmed in position and you've got a global pandemic on your hands.
Yeah.
How's it been the last 2 years? Quiet?
Yeah. Do you know what? The pandemic really helped me turn Drive into what I wanted it to be. And what I mean by that is that Drive, through a pandemic and lockdown when people are not getting in their cars, is quite a hard sell, isn't it? So if people have got a habit of commuting and getting in their car and turning us on, they're not getting the car anymore, what are we there for? How are we still going to get people to listen to us? And for me, and for everybody, I'm sure we were in a little bit of panic and anxiety at the time. Even if you don't realise it, it was low-level anxiety. And if you put the news on, for me, that made it worse. You're just going to hear continuous doom and gloom. And I can remember putting on the Today programme one morning and just like driving to work and I'm a very laid-back person. I'm not very anxious. And I thought I was going to crash. What is going on? I felt utterly terrified. And it really helped me kind of set out what Drive should be. Because if we're going to come on at 4 o'clock every day with just this litany of bad news, no one's going to put us on. We're a speech radio news programme. So how can we make that still listenable? How can we make that something that's reassuring to people? So me and Tony, Liv's the presenter, and Anna Foster at the time, we talked about how we're going to hold people's hands through this. And we were really honest, like, that we're going to be telling you some difficult stuff today, but we're all in it together. Stay with us. We're going to guide each other through, and amongst the litany of bad news, we're going to bring you some stuff that's going to make you smile. We're going to make you laugh. We're going to hold your hands through it. So there was also one point at 5 Live as well, which is obviously a sports station, when our entire sports schedule just fell apart. So from 7 o'clock every day, we had 5 Live Sport for 3.5 hours, and there was no sport. Saturdays and Sundays, there was no sport. That is what 5 Live is pretty much at the weekend. So management was saying things like, do you think you could do an extra hour? And you're thinking, well, actually, yeah, I quite fancy that. And they were saying, you could do a phone-in. I'm thinking, I wouldn't listen to a phone-in about the pandemic at 7 o'clock in the evening. People are in a different frame of mind, in a bit more of an unwind mode, want to be entertained. So I came up with a an hour special called The Extra Mile, which I'm really proud of. And that basically came about from waking up one Saturday morning feeling a bit terrified of the pandemic and just seeing a bus driver in Wales called Keith on Twitter posting videos of himself dancing, and it just really made me laugh. I just thought, we need more Keith, don't we, at the moment? He wasn't letting the pandemic get him down, Keith. He was dancing to all his customers on the bus. So I just, you go on Twitter and Instagram, there were loads of people doing that, weren't there? Do you remember at the start of the pandemic? People were singing at the supermarket. And
I was producing a really serious phone-in on Radio 4 at the time, so it wasn't getting that. And actually that was probably one of the mistakes.
Yeah.
But maybe that's one of the great differences between 5 Live and Radio 4, and arguably there needs to be that difference. At my time on 5 Live Breakfast, sometimes you felt, is 5 Live Breakfast a bit too similar to the Today programme?
Yeah.
But 5 Live can put a smile on her face.
Yeah.
In, I think, a slightly better way. It's slightly more easygoing, as you say. And,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating to hear that the pandemic was where you actually went, we have to do that more. But Tony Livesey is one of the great strengths to that
Yes.
programme, because to sit in the seat where Peter Allen sat for 20 years, that was a momentous change when he stopped presenting Drive, one of the giants of 5 Live and radio in general. But Tony just sits there and it's like a duck to water somehow, isn't it?
Yeah, do you know, Tony and Peter Allen, they've got a lot in common. Working class blokes, didn't go to uni, went into the press, went into journalism, the papers, and then had no kind of, I want to be famous, I want people to hear my voice, I want to be on air. They just happened to slide into that territory by chance, sat in front of a microphone, and it was just natural. And I think the people who are not really desperate and fighting to get on air are often those people that you just want to have a pint with, and that's what radio is. Would you want to go and hang out with this person in the pub? I think a lot of the time when you're looking for new presenters, as we've been doing recently, you can overthink it. Yes. Sometimes, do you want to hang out with that person? Do you want to spend time in their company? Because that's what we're asking people to do for 3 hours a day, isn't it?
He's one of the warmest, cuddliest, if you like, radio presenters I've ever heard.
Yeah.
If I'm not doing something, I just want to listen to Drive because Tony's good company.
Exactly. And reassurance as well. I know when I was off work for a bit, because I've been through a bereavement, and even though it was my programme and everything, I was putting Tony on at 4 o'clock because hearing his voice felt like, I think with Anna and Tony through the pandemic, them coming on at 4 o'clock to the people who were listening every day was just a bit of normality, was a bit of, oh, okay, so the world's going wild, it's going mad. I'm ill, I've lost someone I love, but actually at 4 till 7, we've got our friends there. It's a bit of familiarity, isn't it, and a bit of comfort.
So how much of a nightmare is it when Anna goes off to become Middle East correspondent, no less, and you've got to now find someone that will be that key ingredient, that co-presenter alongside Tony? You've done it, you've got Claire
McDonald starts next month. So we lost Anna, our co-presenter, and management were not expecting it. So in my role, just I don't have any control over who the presenters are at all. I kind of get who I'm given and have to work with them. So the management team, in a slight panic, because they were dealing with our breakfast show and Nikki leaving and various things, Tony Livesey said to the controller, don't rush to make a decision on Drive. I'm quite happy to try a few people out. And they really took us to that, because it'll be 6 months of depth presenters by the time Claire starts,
and
which
is
a lot of work.
That's quite a roller coaster, because you've got to bring them up to speed. They've got to get a feel for the programme.
And what you realise through that, as you'll know, listening on 5 Live, it all sounds, hopefully most of the time, fairly slick and professional, but we ask a lot of our presenters, don't we?
Yes.
We ask a huge amount.
Especially when all the lines have dropped and you're saying to present Phil for a bit. And that's where they earn the money. And in Tony, he can do that.
Yeah,
but it helps if there's someone doing that with him.
Yeah, 3 weeks ago, I don't know when it was, we get the flash comes in at 1 minute past 4 as we go on air that 30 people have drowned in the channel. That's literally the whole programme disappears. And into a really awful story as well, the deaths of 30 innocent people. So in terms of working on Drive, that's a good thing. Some people don't like to be in that element of breaking news and ripping up running orders. For me, those are the best days. That's when we all earn our keep, don't we? And then the presenters, we are literally saying to them, there's no script, there's absolutely nothing. You'll be in the studio saying to them in Tony's ear, this is your guest, one line off you go. That's all they've got in those moments. And it's miles on the clock, isn't it? You were a presenter. I've never wanted to be in front of a microphone, but you've been in those situations, haven't you?
Your throat dries sometimes.
Yeah.
But genuinely, seeing people like you behind the glass is where the reassurance is. And I think Five Live has gone through a lot of turnover in the 10 years. And something I was finding, what was refreshing about that was there were a lot of people coming to join Five Live based in Salford who were not going to ever want to join Five Live in London. And so actually lots of young new talent from different parts of the UK were coming in, and that continues to this day.
Yeah, which was amazing, isn't it? It's absolutely amazing, I think.
What do you think's been achieved by the move? It's 10 years now.
Yeah.
What's been achieved by Five Live and all the other BBC programmes being here, not 200 miles down the M6?
When I started out at Five Live in London, as a working class woman, I felt terrified. I felt like an imposter, like I shouldn't be there. People would talk about, you know, the BBC language and talk about things like Watto and the 810, you know, talking about stuff on Radio 4. That's not an environment I was brought up in. My dad had Five Live on.
Yeah,
but quite really middle class as well.
Yeah.
I mean, when I think, like when Jane Garvey was on Drive, there's just this like all these like really posh. I was just so terrified. You think I don't belong here. Why am I here? If you start now, our newsroom is a very different place. It's much more socio-economically diverse. You hear many more different language accents, should I say?
Yeah, a language will be a challenge. Yeah.
It used to be, a lot more of a terrifying experience working in the newsroom in London. I mean, obviously, I'm older now, more experienced, but I think it's a much nicer place to work. I think times have changed generally. I don't know what it's like in your industry, but I just think compassionate leadership is a lot more favoured now. You don't have to go screaming and shouting and talking down to people to get ahead anymore. I'd like to think that's something I've helped change and move the dial on. You know, I think if you're confident in what you want from your programme, you care about the people around you and you value them, that's how you get the best. It's not from screaming and shouting, is it?
Do you think you would have climbed the ladder as quickly, as effectively, if Five Live hadn't moved? Because actually Five Live tended to be that nobody ever left their roles.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, throw it all up in the air, relocate the network, opportunities open up and continue to open up here.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if the culture would have changed as much if we were still in London. I don't know if my style would have been in favour so much. Who knows? But like you say, there wouldn't have been as much of a... Although having said that, I mean, since we have been in Salford for 10 years, we were promised all these great opportunities. And really it has been until the last few months when Mike says, so this big story team's moving to Salford, which is effectively the BBC business unit. They're calling it Work and Money. And there is long form audio as well, where you've worked. So there's only in the last few months a load of jobs have moved up, which means people from Five Live have left.
Yes.
And we're finally getting
that turnover.
We're getting a bit more turnover and bringing in some newer people.
If you've just joined the stream of what we're doing here today, Anna Stewart, editor of Five Live Drive, is our guest. If you'd like to ask Anna a question and you're watching the live stream, @BroadcastRevo is where you can ask a question. On Twitter, @BroadcastRevo is us, and you can join the chat using the hashtag #JoinTheBroadcastRevolution. Let's talk about content. For the uninitiated, describe to me what Five Live Drive is about, because I found in my time at Five Live, some people thought it was a sports station.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's a news and a sports station. It's basically everything. And Drive is very much at the top of the tree in providing exactly that.
Yeah. You wouldn't invent Five Live now, would you?
You wouldn't.
Who would invent news and sport?
Yeah.
And we're often caught at our time of day in that interest time where you have to decide what's more important to your audience. I lived through 2 years of Brexit debate, which were all happening in our time. We were on air till 10 o'clock, more times than you can imagine. If there's a Premier League match on, what are you choosing? I mean, Premier League is everything to Five Live, isn't it? But then we're saying that Brexit's the most important thing happening in the country. So you get caught in a lot of those editorial calls, and then you end up coming out of it thinking, what a weird choice. No one would invent news and sport. What do you ask, sorry?
The content of the programme itself. I mean, when I produced it, you would have a top story, a second story, headlines, bit of sport, business, another story on the half past. sometimes the stories were quite short because I think we tried to put too much content in. I think you let it breathe a bit more.
Yeah.
It's all the better for it.
Yeah, times have changed. It used to be about how many stories you could fit in.
Yeah.
And why is that? We didn't have phones. Everyone gets their news off phones now. So the old style, it was almost like a news bulletin, but set over 3 hours. So per hour, how many stories would you say would you be putting in Drive?
9 an hour.
9, okay. Well, on days when we've got 6 an hour, I think that's too many. It depends. Every day is different, but I've really having to reset now as we get through 6 months and we've got new presenters starting. What is Drive? So one thing that's really, really helping me figure out exactly where we go next is the licence fee renewal. So if we were to prove to Tim Davie or to the government, whoever, what 5 Live is for, why are we here? Why can't BBC News do without 5 Live? What are we offering? And if you speak to, I said it in a team meeting this week, and what does everyone say? Audience. We have that unique relationship with our audience. They are absolutely front and centre of everything we do. Live moments, breaking news, getting around the UK as well. We're in this great position that we're not in London anymore, which makes us feel different, but we don't also want to just focus on the Northwest. We're not so good at England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. You know, we've got to get around the regions as well. So once you really focus on those issues, I'm going to have a real push on hearing more listeners on the show.
Yes.
You know how many texts we get. We read them. Why aren't the people coming on to tell us their story a bit more? So we're trying to put a few more callers on. That doesn't mean I turn it into a phone in, but that's what makes us unique. You know, we can be talking about, I mean, people text him for Tony Livesey's funny, you know, he will always have some funny text punt on the go and it keeps the show alive. We love that. But actually, one day this week we started talking about postal delays, so people not getting their post. Our business presenter mentioned it as a bit of an aside, and I was like, actually, in terms of what 5 Live does, people not getting their post. And then, anyway, so we mentioned it to see what we got. We spoke to a doctor who nearly didn't get his MBE because his post was late. We heard from a woman who couldn't get married because she didn't get a marriage certificate back. Posties from around the country all started texting us. I can tell you what's going on in the post rooms. So on a day like that, instead of having some random story off the BBC website that we thought was relevant a few hours ago, I'm saying to the team, get rid of those, call those people back. Those are stories that are absolutely front and centre of what we do and what 5 Live is for, what's happening in post rooms across the country, you know. And those stories are coming to us as well. We don't have to work that hard. Yeah, they take a bit of checking out. The postman we've put on air ended up wasn't the best 2 minutes of radio. I think he may have had a bit of a long shift, shall we say. But again, that's a bit of a risk. If you put more callers on air, they're not all going to be gold. But that's really where I'm taking the programme. I don't want you to put on Drive and think, I could have seen all that on the BBC News website. I want the listeners to come, first of all, for the presenters. They're going to come and see what Tony and Claire were talking about that day. Yeah. It's a conversation. We're not telling you the news. That's very old-fashioned. Let Radio 4 do that. You tell us the news. You be part of the show. It's a family. It's the kind of chat you'd have in the pub. You know, people would be talking about Sue Gray. Should Boris Johnson go? Yeah. My post didn't turn up. Barry Cryer's died. Did you hear about that? Me and Tony, our mantra is that news doesn't have to be dreary. So just because something really serious has happened, Tony doesn't put on this is my serious news voice. When he's interviewing a politician, he's not trying to be Jeremy Paxman. Whoever you put in front of him, he will speak to them exactly the same way. It's a conversation, isn't it? And we've got to feel like, you know, Emma Barnett does an amazing job of grilling politicians. You won't get that on Drive. Yeah. We don't want to get the headlines. Emma Barnett does some great tricks, and on digital it will explode. She'll be in all the papers. That's great. That's what she does. We're not trying to do that. We're not trying to catch anyone out. We want, again, because listeners are at the heart of everything we do, we want the listeners to learn something from that interview, not feel like they've just been caught in, you know, the middle of a row. How much planning goes into Drive in advance? Because you've said it can be incredibly reactive and responsive. You can change everything like that. Yeah. But is there a planning team? Are they sometimes trying to put stuff in days in advance? Because certainly the people here would love to know, what's your dream content? Yeah. And I think there's 2 ways of doing it. There's reacting on the day, of course there is, but what sort of planning goes into a Drive programme? There used to be none for years. There wasn't anyone you worked on there, was there?
No, not at all. We would start off at 9 in the morning and you'd have to fill 3 hours by the end of the day.
Yeah, with a much bigger team than we have now.
Yeah.
So that's just one thing worth bearing in mind. And, you know, one thing I'm sure you're aware, BBC News has been through some huge savings recently. So we're probably working 25% down than we were even a year ago. So again, that's really affects the editorial and how we put the programme together, and why it's fewer items done better, because I don't want the producers overworked. And we're working with 2 less producers than when you were on there, so we have 3-day producers. So when I took over during the pandemic, we tried quite a lot of planning actually, and I think we needed it because there was nothing going on apart from the pandemic. So we did a series around well-being, because I just thought mental health is really important through this, and that had quite a lot of planning that went into it, and that came from our team. I think I ended up doing too much, and actually now the news is busy again, we don't need so much.
Yeah.
But I do think it should offer something. It shouldn't just be there because this was planned a week ago and you know, and it gets on. It's got to be really good, and it's got to be really relevant.
Yeah.
So we now in BBC News have had a massive restructure, and we've had it at 5 Live as well. So the overall ethos being fewer things that spread further. So you shouldn't just have a load of work that's gone into something that goes out on Radio 4 once, and there's this very old-fashioned idea, probably still a lot of people on Radio 4, oh, it's ours, it's a Radio 4 exclusive. Well, it doesn't matter, that should be, if it's good enough, why isn't it the website? Why isn't it? It should be going across BBC News. But of course, within the BBC News banner, there's lots of individual outlets who want to sound unique and have their own exclusives. And I get that, but we do have to make things travel further. So this restructure has been set up for that to happen. It's really early days on that. And the way it's working, there's something called a commissioning team now in BBC News, and anyone can send ideas to it. And there's lots of meetings with lots of bigwigs, and the idea is that 10 different outlets have to sign up to running it, and then once it's commissioned it gets a bit of money. So if it's a radio piece, the money will be used to get cameras on it, to turn it into a TV piece, and it's to make it bigger and to go much further.
And is that commissioning team open to hearing from people externally saying you should be doing this is what can be offered, here's content that outside agencies can offer, PR agencies can offer, and that can be part of that story?
Such a good question. I think the kind of things that I'd like for Driving 5 Live, you know, case studies, we've just been talking about real people, they're absolute gold. And if you're someone who can offer something like that, real people, why couldn't that be part of the mix of this commissioning process? I mean, the way a lot of these stories are going to be made, it's been divided, BBC News, into story teams. So like I said, work and money, that's the story team that's coming to Salford. There's learning and identity, there's technology, and so they're all going to be specialists. So imagine if you know, especially if you have got a technology expert, for example, I think it's Monica Soriano, someone else from 5 Live is heading that team up in Glasgow. Yeah, if you've got a couple of contacts in that technology team, you've got a technology expert, why not get in there and pitch?
Specialist teams rising up, and actually it's worth contacting those sort of specialist teams.
Yeah. What's
the right sort of timing? Because and I suppose you can't answer this question 100%, but there are going to be days where you actually would love to know about an expert in a particular area on the day.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Ukraine is going to play massively.
Yes.
So there is going to be somebody who knows their stuff about Russia and Ukraine. You might want them that day. But then you have your planning team. When does your planning team need to know about it? When would you say a specialist team needs to know about it? I assume they're looking at big events, whether it's the Queen's Speech or A-level results day, whatever, an apprenticeship week that's coming up, for example. They'll want to know even more in advance. Yeah,
it's really hard to answer that in a way. I mean, because I work on a daily news programme. In terms of daily news, experts I would send, you know, if you think you've got a great expert on Ukraine, I would send that anytime. And then if that expert happens to offer us something in terms of gender or diversity balance, you know, as you probably know at the BBC we're measured 50-50 in terms of gender, and we also look at racial differences as well. So we have at the end of our show we send an email with our programme highlights, and we would say in terms of gender what the percentage is. Is it 50-50? Is it, you know, we have to kind of name or shame ourselves.
You were one of the first programmes to try and achieve that.
Yeah, I think we were actually, and we have done pretty well, because Drive used to be very male heavy.
Yes.
When it was more of a news show.
Are you finding that's now having an impact? Because you're trying to get that 50-50 gender split of guests in every edition of the programme. Are you being offered more strong female spokespeople? Or is that a problem?
It's a problem, yeah. I'd love to see more women offered. I really would. And if you have got a female guest or somebody who's racially diverse, I'd flag that in the first sentence. It makes such a difference to see. And, to say this, and to actually sell the contributor a little bit more sometimes rather than what they're talking about, because that's what we're looking for. It's radio. We're looking for great talkers, aren't we? Yep. So we'll still let men on. So if it is a man, but they happen to be an expert and can offer a particular view, or you think they're just a great talker, or they've done they've done a lot of media, flag that and really sell the guest. Because often,
do you push back and say to an organisation, okay, you are wanting a particular organisation that's big in the news that day, do you push back and say, look, we would love to have a female voice from you, please?
Yeah, we really have. You have to ask those questions, and I think they felt quite awkward for producers initially to say that, but I think people get more in the habit, and what will happen often is I know producers will go to a certain person and it'll be a woman and they'll go, oh, I can't do it, can you speak to this person who's a bloke? Yeah. And women still aren't, breaks my heart a bit to say it, but still don't put themselves forward as much to broadcast. We still do find that people are, no, I just don't want to come on.
But an agency listening to this could think, actually, we should be saying to a client, find that great female voice within any organisation, find that authority who happens to be a woman. There is a greater chance to get on air than there was before.
There really is, yeah. I think that's the best advice. If you're working with a client and they're giving you 3 men, just push back a little bit and say, look, you must have some great women we can speak to, who we can offer up. We know the BBC's measuring, and we're doing it for very good reason, because if you don't measure, you don't shift the dial. So the fact we're holding ourselves to account on it, and we're talking about it in meetings in the morning, at the end of the show we're saying that wasn't good enough, it was only 30% female voices. If we're holding ourselves to account, if that's something you can offer a bit of a solution and help us with, then yeah.
So to contact your planning team, when would your planning team like to know about something? When they're working on an idea, are they working a week in advance?
Our planning team is now called Impact. So
very BBC.
Yeah. It's more about, so something our Impact team's worked on recently is a series called Word Matters on literacy. We're trying to reach our underserved audiences. So there'll be a particular, we will have a kind of more daily newsy element to this team, the kind of nuts and bolts, but what they're really pushing on is, so at the moment, cost of living. So cost of living is a great example. When people are telling us off talking about these parties at Downing Street, why aren't you focusing on cost of living? Got a point, haven't they? So we're sending Chris Warburton, one of our reporters, on the road. He's been out already, went round, spent a day in Leicester. He's out next week. He's out in Wales. He's in a pub. He's talking to, because it's Chris Warburton, you remember, he's talking to people about the cost of living. It's everything that is like front and centre of what our audiences care about at the moment. Inflation, what's going to happen in April? Is this national insurance going to send us over the edge? So that's knowing if it's a big theme like that or a big audience driver, which cost of living it is. It's kind of knowing the audience, isn't it, and making things relevant. And I think you can see a bit of a theme, can't you? Anyway, just looking at the website, look, inflation's top story again. So what are those issues that you think might get picked up on? Because there's a bit more appetite then, your kind of offer might get a little bit more attention if you think, well, I've got that in the front of my head. So
maybe see a big event coming, whether it's Queen's Speech or budget days coming, and actually work out well in advance and actually be offering that sometimes weeks in advance.
Yeah.
There would be an ear wanting to hear that within 5 Live and these specialist teams.
Yes, definitely. It's quite hard at 5 because if you get in touch with 5, because we're so on the day and we don't necessarily, like Drive doesn't have a planning team. We've got there's only 11 of us now. We're a tiny team. I think the cuts and the savings are really, there's probably a bit of an advantage in there as well, because people are really, really up against it, despite what certain people in government might say. People are working really hard. On our team on Drive, we're also doing the news bulletins. So I've got, 5 senior journalists who are outputting Drive and reading the news. The other day, the guy who's outputting Drive was running off to read the news at the same time. Things have really changed. You'd be quite shocked. So there's a bit of I don't know, there's maybe a bit of a way in there that there'll be people on day teams who have been asked to fix an expert on inflation or the Ukraine or something. And actually, if a PR offer comes through, this is a fantastic speaker, she's a female, it's like that's going to be a real gift on the day around midday.
What do you want to see when you receive that email? You're all busy people, so I've always been a believer that a broadcast advisory release needs to be less rather than more. It needs to be short, sweet.
Yeah.
How do you lay it out? What do you want to know? You want a name, what they do, what they're going to say.
Yeah, and if you've got a case study, amazing. I'd like to sell that at the top. So it's a mixture of real people and analysis, isn't it? We want experts and analysis. So yeah, I would sell your guest rather than your press release.
Right.
Because that's what we're looking for. And again, tell us if they're a great talker. Tell us if they're really...
They've done this before.
Yeah, they've done this before. They've done loads of media, really engaging. Somebody who can, for 5 Live, we want things broken down, complicated things broken down into quite a digestible way, don't we? We want them for... So, yeah, a bit of a sell-on.
Not patronising, but explaining in layman's terms. Yeah. Let's not have the acronyms.
Let's not have the acronyms, yeah. And also... For Drive, we love it as well when a guest comes on and they just pick up on something they've heard on the show. They kind of feel like Tony loves that. They straight away will be like, oh great, we should get that person on again because they've got it. They've got the tone of the show.
You like a repeat guest. If you've enjoyed somebody, you want them back.
Yeah, definitely. And if they've got that tone right, if they've kind of got stuck in, like Sarah Orchard, she's our rugby correspondent, but she came on last night and our presenters were talking about Star Wars v Star Trek. Sarah came on and joined in, and they chatted about that for a couple of minutes, and then spoke about the reason she was on the show. Like I say, it's like joining that pub chat, isn't it? So, guests who come on and sound really warm and human, not like they're trying to just read their press release.
Talk to me about the case studies that you mentioned. Do you like to have a case study outside of the Southeast, for example? Do you like to have a case study that's a woman? What age would you like to have on the air? Because 5 Live's average age of listener used to be late 40s.
It's 50s.
It's 50s now. So it's getting older. So
no, it has got younger, I think.
Got a little bit younger.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever managed to get in the 40s.
Right, okay.
But that's the dream.
What's your dream case study then? If you are trying to maybe get a younger audience interested, the replenishers, I think the BBC used to call them.
Yeah.
What's your dream case study?
I think it depends. I think anyone with a great story. Anyone with a great story to tell on a certain...
First-hand experience.
First-hand experience, yeah. And I wouldn't state a preference for anything, because if, and also I think as well when we're talking about case studies, I'm less bothered about gender and 50-50 targets, because those stories are so precious.
Yes.
If you've got someone on with a real life story to tell. Probably one of the best guests we had on last year came through Mike, actually, a guy called Amar Latif.
Yeah.
And he was talking about tech, I think, for young visually impaired people.
He was blind, and the Guide Dogs organisation were making sure that thousands of iPads and iPhones were reaching younger people who had sight loss. And he was somebody who had lost his sight. Fantastic Scottish accent. And he came on and you could hear Tony's heart melt, really.
Yeah, absolutely. He was so engaging, wasn't he?
He was.
And then because he was so open and lovely, Tony just wanted to talk to him for ages. So they had just an amazingly moving talk, didn't they, about what it's like to live without sight.
And that particular story, there wasn't actually a voice from Guide Dogs on. Actually, he was the voice from Guide Dogs. How often do you actually want to have a case study communicate the message, if a message is being communicated, rather than an authority voice from an organisation?
Sometimes you want both, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it is really nice to have. Sometimes, obviously, I'd be terrified, to be shoved on the radio. So sometimes a case study, especially if they're younger and could be a bit nervous, it's really nice to have that expert voice next to them. And again, to give a bit more context. And like Mike says with Drive, it used to be 3-minute items that you'd rush through. I like things to run as long as they need, and we'll often film 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So if something looked really strong enough, I'd easily give 20 minutes to a case study and expert. Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's good to know. Questions are coming through via our Twitter account @BroadcastRevo is where to send those through to. Polly Fairbank asks, who is your typical audience? So how many are listening? 2 million, is it?
Nearly, yeah.
About 2 million.
Yeah.
And give me a description of a typical 5 Live Drive listener.
It's funny actually, Polly, because when the audience data comes through and it says our average age listener is 51 and you see that is the youngest of the 5 Live news programmes, you think, why are we broadcasting to quite a lot of old people? Because if that's the average, I honestly think 5 Live Drive should appeal. I aim it a bit more at my age, which is early 40s, because I think early 40s are the replenishers if our age group is slightly older, and actually a lot of people on the team are of similar age. So I think if you can make a programme that appeals to you or the people making the programme, and actually this is a really good example from this morning in our morning meeting. Barry Cryer's died.
Yes.
So they come straight to me, is Barry Cryer relevant? Should we be talking about? And I have a bit of an issue with this age thing. I've got to appeal to a young audience. But Barry Cryer is an absolute legend, and even if a younger person listening doesn't know who Barry Cryer is, they'll know his influence.
Yes.
So we will bid for Mark Gatiss, we will bid for these younger comedians who are really influenced by him.
Yeah.
And in terms of radio, I'm much more interested in how you make people feel. So in terms of, like, Tony will be absolutely devastated by Barry Cryer. He'll know all his life's work. Yeah. He will come on and he will make that authentic, and he'll make you, if you're 25 listening, you don't know who Barry Cryer is, you'll still hear an amazing bit of radio there.
What do you see, asks the Wildfowl and Wetland Trust, so I hope they're going to get an answer from you environmentally, but what do you see as the big things listeners are going to be interested in over the next year or two?
Cost of living,
Yeah.
cost of living, honestly.
That's important.
It's that important.
How do you make sure that isn't too businessy? Because 5 Live needs to do it with a friendly face. So if you're going to get on people talking about the cost of living, what do you want? What do you want to be offered by people?
Again, real stories and how solutions, isn't it? Solutions. Yeah. How can I, and well, also, like, why is my heating bill doubled? Where am I going to get that money from? Yeah. Can you help me? Can you, so it's like explanation. It's, can you help me save that money? Yeah. Practical solutions are absolutely key. Real life stories. But again, there's a real impartiality issue. We've got to be very careful on this, and we can't just keep saying, bringing it from one side. There's an awful lot of people from the other side we need to speak to, just to make sure we're balanced when we're telling that story. It can't just be cost of living's going up, it's Brexit, it's government's fault. Yeah. So we've got to think about our impartiality as well. Aside from cost of living, we've got some great sports stuff coming up this year. So I don't know if there's any agencies that work with friends and family of athletes and sports people. They always do really well. So we've got the Winter Olympics coming up, start next week. We had a lot of help through one company through the Olympics who just every day had like a family member of one of the competitors. Right. And that's fantastic because, we often try and put in the work to find those people ourselves. But the BOA were being really strict and we had to go through them for everything. So actually this company were coming through with some guests that really helped us out there.
And were those people, perhaps advocating for a particular brand on occasions? Do you mind if that happens? Here is a former Paralympian. Yes, they are representing an organisation. We'll ask maybe about that campaign, but you're also wanting to hear from them about what are your thoughts about the next Paralympics? I
always think the payoff is one mention. You start to take the mic. Do you know what I mean? We'll get one mention, we'll do your mention, but we won't put it in the queue. And we can make it come out a bit naturally in the interview. Yes. And then if it comes out 5 more times, we're probably not going to use you again.
One mention, or you're not coming on again. That's useful to know. Here we go. Time is already flying. Are there any questions here that people would like to ask? And if so, do put your hand up, and we'll try and get to you. There's one there. Do you want to shout out?
Hi, Chris Morris from the press office at Manchester Metropolitan University.
Hi.
So we're sat on a pile of experts. First of all, I want to say. We do a lot of work with 5 Live, and they're really great. In fact, one of the team was on one of the producers yesterday, talking about Winter Olympians. And to blow our own trumpet, Eleanor Byman, our Russia-Ukraine expert, was on 5 Live on Friday. So
fantastic.
Stop looking for that.
Thank you.
What interests me is the spread across the different programs at 5 Live, and how you hit those up, and is the kind of one central point you just say, I can get breakfast, I can get drive, I can get everyone in one fell swoop.
Yeah, there isn't really. It's really annoying, isn't it? Because like I say, we did have when we had more staff, different planning teams. and now that's been reduced to this one impact team, and they're not really, their role is not really to, you know, give individual programs experts. They're looking at the bigger stuff. So there isn't really, but it's probably worth just saying to me or a friendly producer who are the people on each program I could email, and then if you have, say, one assistant editor or, you know, one or two contacts on each program that you can then send things through, and you'll hit a good spread across the day. It's probably the best way to do it.
You were mentioning the specialist teams a little earlier. You know, how does somebody contact a specialist team if they're wanting to contact a specialist team? What is the best route? A phone call or an email to start us off with? What do you prefer?
That's a good question. I tell you what is the worst thing, so not to sound negative, but when we go on air at 4:00, we'll often get a call to pitch something for like 3 days time or a week on Friday, and that's never the best time to call because we've just gone on air with that day's programme, and you're not going to get a great response at that point. So for that day, I'd say a phone call around midday.
Right.
It's not bad.
Mm-hmm.
A bit earlier, people are getting their lists out, and it's all a bit frantic between, say, 9 and 11:30.
Send you an email first, follow it up with a phone call?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think so. And again, like a really pithy email in the first 2 sentences.
Right.
really
short.
First 2-3 sentences. Because I'll just be scanning looking for key bits of information, really.
I mean, people do research. Do you want to see stats or whatever, or are you going to ask for those once, as it were, you've been hooked? Once you've said, yeah, I like that voice, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you can always put it further down, but I'm not going to be reading the press release.
Big and bold at the top.
Yeah.
Who it is, what they're going to say, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
When we talk about those specialist teams, though, how does somebody reach out to them? You say, for instance, one team's in Glasgow, for instance.
Yeah, they're just building them all at the moment.
Right.
So it's really early days. I mean, I think the key people running those teams are in place now.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good question.
We will endeavour to find out who's running all of them.
Yeah.
Because that's really, really useful.
And also some of them, you know, like I said, it's a technology team that Monica is heading up. That's quite a small team. That's only 20 people. So I guess it's finding your friendly people on that team, isn't it?
Got you. Do you like a big business guest on? Do you want a chief executive?
Less and less so on Drive, I'd say, but again, it depends who it is and how relevant are they. So relevance was the other thing I spoke to the team about this week, just sounding like we're always really, you know, we're not talking about some random store off the website, but if that big chief executive is of a big energy company, that's totally relevant, isn't it?
Yeah.
And have they spoken yet? And are they going to have a nice, honest chat with us about the situation, or are they just coming on to sell something? You know, again, it's like, are we going to get something out of it as well that's going to be of use to our listener?
Yeah. Thank you, Romana, for that question about whether it should be email, whether it should be phone. Any other questions here that will make sure we're representing you who've come here today? Don't feel you have to ask. There's stacks we want to ask. Yes, feel free.
Just wondering about the tech, because obviously particularly with the pandemic, probably got less people in the studio,
Yeah.
people ringing in. What are your pet hates, like when you get a guest on and things maybe like the sound quality might be rubbish or something like, what can people do if they think they're going to come on to make sure they sound as good as they can?
Yeah, it's a great
Just
question.
because you're not on microphone, I'll summarise for those listening to the stream. A question about the technology, how people are actually getting on the air with 5 Live now, and any thoughts there?
Yeah, do you know what? We're trying to do more people in vision for digital clips, and we're not always great at it on Drive actually, but and in vision as well means the presenter can see them, which often just leads to a really nice interview, doesn't it? And there's just a bit more eye contact there. So, you know, can that person easily be in vision? And, you know, whether that's Zoom, we use loads of Zoom now.
And you never used that before the pandemic? It seems to have been
it was Skype, wasn't it, before the pandemic?
or frankly, a mobile phone was still very much in existence.
Yeah.
But Zoom is your
Zoom
preference?
is our go-to, actually.
FaceTime?
FaceTime and FaceTime audio, yeah. So it's either of those two are our first port of call. You know, I always hear people on desk asking if they've got an iPhone. And then just the annoying thing, you get nothing to do about. It's great before you go on air. The line goes and you end up with them on the phone anyway. But yeah, I think thinking about how you can get them in vision, and also giving people that bit of training before they go on air to have the headphones, you know, to make sure they're set up, nothing embarrassing in the background, and, you know, doing a bit of that work for us is always quite helpful.
And what about the advice that might be offered to somebody, because, you know, someone might not have been on the radio ever and suddenly they're being asked to dial in on a Zoom.
Yeah.
What should they be thinking about? Because you do use the video from this radio interview for social media, for example.
Yeah. So, and also, you know, you don't have to, because a lot of people want to do a radio interview, but they don't want to be filmed.
So you can say no.
You can say no, yeah, absolutely. Right. Obviously, from a PR point of view, it's helpful to do it in vision because there's a chance it might end up on socials, which means you can share it. We don't normally bother anymore putting stuff on digital that doesn't have that doesn't have someone in vision, because the digital producers don't have as much time to, you know, they have to make slides and put pictures together and all that kind of stuff, whereas if they've just been filmed, they can top and tail it and put it out. So from a PR point of view, it's probably good to try and do it in vision, just in case you get on the socials.
Do you see a time where you will be getting people back into studios face to face with someone like Tony and Claire? There are, of course, local radio stations, each with an NCA, a News and Current Affairs studio in. Or do you actually see people coming on 5 Live Drive will be doing it via Zoom forevermore?
Yeah, we've got to think of the environment, haven't we?
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, so sustainability's obviously we're talking about it a lot more.
Yeah.
Sport are really good at it, apparently. They're way ahead of news.
Right.
So I'm joining some meetings about it, actually, because we did a big series on 5 Live, which is ongoing. It's based out of Leeds, because Leeds have made all these kind of 0% carbon free promises. Carbon neutral. So sustainability is really key, and I just think the days of bringing people in taxis to sit in a studio, they're gone, and it's quite right they are.
Even with TV, do you think? Do you think TV's going to be happy with people doing
Not sure. That's a good question. What do you think?
It's a good question. I would say there's going to be a blend. People have got better. People were always used to doing down-the-line interviews, weren't they? You would go into BBC East Midlands Today and look down the lens of a camera and go on Newsnight. So, and there's not much difference doing a Zoom. But sometimes it's lovely to have that debate in a studio where there are two people. There is an intimacy to it that it just can't be replicated.
Yeah, viewers and listeners' expectations have changed, haven't they? We've got used now to seeing these big name correspondents doing two ways from their lounge.
Yes.
Haven't we? We've just got used to it now. So I'm sure, like you say, I think you're right, there'll be a bit of a balance, won't there?
A question again from somebody watching the live stream. Josie asks, would you be interested in how cost of living, which you've emphasised is a big story, impacts people's day-to-day lives with particular conditions, for example, so a particular health condition, and that way in? Yeah,
absolutely, and that would be a kind of golden case study, I'd say, because again, it's would count as, you know, we talk about underserved audiences, normally in terms of where they are in the country and socio-economic. Disability is a huge kind of underserved audience, and an area that I'm part of a disability steering group, so just thinking about how we represent disabled on air, you know, and using guests who happen to be good guests, who happen to have a disability, rather than always, you know, talking to people when there's a story purely about disability. So trying to increase somebody who will come on and do a paper review or be a contributor, you know, and that's what we're working on with this forum.
How much do 5 Live programmes talk amongst themselves? Because I remember 5 Live as being quite competitive, and a breakfast programme might want the guest, and Drive might want the guest. Is there greater interaction between the programmes now, or is it a matter of you've got to target each individual programme team in turn?
It's really changed, thank goodness. Pleased to hear. So if a great guest was on breakfast, well, you should be replaying that great guest rather than try. And obviously, there's a bit of an issue around our presenters, because they want to be on air all the time. They want to be doing the interviews, but they just have to get over it, to be honest. So for Drive, we're in a really good point of part of the day where there's been Nikki's phone in, where there's been Nihal's, who will have Benedict Cumberbatch on. We should be replaying all that, not all of it, but we should have 1 or 2 of those moments in every programme, and I always push for that, because it's Drive, then you get a load of breaking news, they're often the first things that go, but it's something I'm trying to do. So this was a big deal on Nikki's phone in this morning, not going, oh, they did it, we take that on. The fact it was a big deal, you know, think more like the commercial sector. LBC will roll with the same story all day. We shouldn't be going, they've done it, we'll do something else. on a big news day, we should be saying this is a big deal to our audience, keep it going.
I mean, I remember hearing 5 Live also do something on Nikki's phone-in, which in those days was 9 till 10 in the morning. There's now 2 hours of Nikki just doing a phone-in. But actually, it's worth listening sometimes to those because you'll hear an opportunity that Drive might want to follow up on. I think on that particular day, it was all about accessibility. A wheelchair user's video had gone viral online because she couldn't get down the street, because all the pubs had put all of the chairs and the tables out on the street. As a result, guide dogs ended up on the news channel shortly after that, talking about accessibility from a blind person's point of view, and that can work again. You hear a news story and that could work on Drive. The advantage for you, of course, is your programme is there towards the end of a day. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to Output and thought you've got a client who can offer a guest on that, on that particular issue they're talking about in Nikki's programme, that's definitely a good time to get in touch with us, because we're probably having those conversations ourselves and saying, how can we take that on, who we're going to speak to. So if we get an offer or get a call, got this great guest, blah, 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 heard it on Nikki's show, you love it when you feel like people have listened to your output. And I know you don't have time to all the time, but if you can show that bit of knowledge in our output, that's,
But don't sit in an office with nothing on, have something on, and if it's 5 Live, all the better.
Yeah, if that's who you're pitching to.
Andrew has emailed from the University of Bath, a bit of a tech question, but ISDNs, is it worth investing in ISDN, or is that actually becoming slightly defunct now?
I don't think it is worth investing. I think it is becoming defunct, which is amazing to say, isn't it? All those years
defunct
of OBs
ISDN
trying to...
and Hello Zoom.
Yeah, get your Wi-Fi connection strong.
Right, okay. Other questions from here? Yeah, one from the front.
In terms of Neil from Manchester Film Festival, high-profile guests in terms of celebrities, are they something that's interesting to 5, or is that more like your Nihal earlier in the...
Yeah, do you know
Just
what?
interrupting, for those who didn't hear your question on the stream, high-profile guests, is that of interest to you?
Yes, definitely. And we do now, in terms of like more of a central system, I meant to say before, actually for celebrity guests at 5 Live, we do have 2 celebrity bookers now who book for the whole station. So I can give you their names if you've not been in touch already. And that's working so well, because rather than different programmes just, around the Oscars or around those big events, each different programme just, harassing people. We've now got Chloe and Liam who are forming really good relationships with loads of different PR companies, and in the last few weeks the names that are appearing on the network are huge. Breakfast are really interested as well. I think we've got Rick Edwards in, who's got XT4, a bit more celeb about him. He's got a few celeb mates, so you've heard some big names on Breakfast. For Drive, they come to us last. If it's the other programmes haven't wanted a name, we'll often get off with them. But I think for us as well, with Tony, he's like real man of the people, so he loves MasterChef. We've got Santosh from MasterChef coming. That's our kind of Corrie. The soaps. We're a bit less A-list, I would say, on Drive, but definitely interested in hearing from celebs. Yeah.
Quick question about the licence fee. Lots of discussion about that yet again. How does that affect morale just on the ground for programme teams? Because one day, if the licence fee did disappear, and it might disappear, that's going to have a major impact.
Do you know what? When, so Nadine Dorries puts out a tweet on a Sunday and you're at home, it's really devastating, actually. You just think, because I've lived through a few licence fee settlements, as you have, and I'm not saying licence fee is perfect and we live in a different age. I'm sure, of course, it needs modernising, and that's all your bigger picture stuff. But it feels there's humans at the other end of that tweet she put out. A lot of people who've already lost their jobs. BBC News has lost 400 or 500 people through after a pandemic. So it's been quite tough anyway. So to read that, it's really hard on morale. So as a manager, that's my job as well on every meeting that week to see how everyone is. But then we get our heads down and think, what can we do? Well, we can't change any of that, but what we can do day to day, as I mentioned at the start, is think what we're for and have a real push on just really making 5 Live as good and relevant and useful to BBC News as it can be, because that you can have a bit of control over that, can't you?
But news in the last few days, ITV News expanding by quite some measure its news coverage. So is it
in the north as well?
Yeah, so it's a good time to be in broadcast news, and there are more opportunities coming in, not necessarily within the BBC, but outside of it.
Yeah, that was great to see, although they have poached an amazing person. Someone told me she's off to ITV yesterday, actually, which is a bit sad. But no, it's good. It's a great opportunity. It means, I think, I was reading about, the justification for it is that the audiences to news have grown exponentially through the pandemic, and I guess whether that is just a pandemic thing and it continues, who knows? But if they're moving Corrie for the news, I mean that's quite a bold step, isn't it? And as you say, more jobs coming up here, which is good, and again reflecting the UK a lot better, which I'm a big believer in since I've moved to the north of England.
So lots of offers outside of the southeast. Do you want to hear more from those?
Yeah, why not? Although actually for 5 Live, don't forget, we're up here and we get accused of being Radio Manchester, so there are parts of the country.
Don't forget other regions.
Yeah, Cornwall,
Southwest.
Bristol. Yeah, definitely. Really interested in offers.
And Northern Ireland too, which has always been a drop ball by 5 Live. It often doesn't get enough Ulster voices on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anna, thank you so much for coming in for us. An hour has flown by.
Wow, that went
thanks
quick.
to all with us. Thanks to those watching the live stream. I should mention, do follow us on Instagram as well, @Broadcast Revolution. That's where you'll often see actually news about upcoming events. Speaking of which, our next event is in early March with a senior producer from GB News, which should be quite interesting.
I might come to that.
Plenty to ask about that. Well, one of your former stalwarts, Eamon, is now there fronting GB
Eamon
News,
Holmes,
which is quite an interesting one.
Yeah,
so
amazing.
lots to ask of GB News. So do join us for that one. We hope to be back in Manchester or even in Salford to link up with the BBC Business team as they gradually get up here. We'll be aiming to do that a little bit later on this year as well. But if you show your appreciation with a round of applause for Anna Stewart.
Thank you.